Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast,
a platform we use to explore varying perspectives and opinion through candid conversation.
We chat about philosophy, business, and all things life. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go.
All right, guys. Today we're joined by a guest. His name is Tom Cronin. Tom is someone who spent 26 years in the finance markets as one of Sydney's leading bonds and swap brokers. He discovered meditation in the early stages of his career when the anxiety and chaos he was experiencing hit a crisis point, and it completely transformed his world both personally and professionally. Tom's passion for reducing stress and chaos in people's lives led him to founding the Stillness Project, a global movement to inspire 1 billion people to sit in stillness every day. His ongoing work in transformational leadership and cultivating inner peace through meditation takes him around the world, hosting retreats, mentoring, presenting keynote talks, teaching, and also authoring 6 books, including the internationally popular film and book experience, The Portal. So with great pleasure, I bring to you Tom Cronin. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Hey guys, good to be here. Thanks for inviting me along today.
It's a pleasure, Tom, and we're really excited to have you on today. Les has told us a little bit about you, I guess some cliff notes, but what I'd love to hear and invite you to do is to let us know about your origin story and where you come from and how you've come to be Tom Cronin of today.
Gosh, yeah, it's one of those, like, how long's a piece of string, isn't it? I guess you could go all the way back. I grew up on a farm. I'm not going to be too detailed in this, but, it's important to incorporate this because I had a very holistic upbringing, a very tight-knit Catholic family. We prayed a lot. I had a strong sense of connection to something. I called it God at that particular point. But growing up on a farm and being around nature all the time, we were very remote. And, I had a strong sense of connection to the land as well. They kind of instilled in me some sort of framework and a foundation of living. And then in the 20s, I got into finance as a broker, and it was very much Wolf of Wall Street. He started Jordan Belfort in his career as the Wolf of Wall Street in 1987, the same year I started my career. And he was 22 and I was 19. And, when I watched that movie, it kind of gave me shivers at how accurately they portrayed what a trading room floor looked like. And that was very much what things were like in my world. And before long, I'm swept up by the glamour and the glitz and the narcissism and the decadence and the indulgences of, a lot of money at a young age, and what 80s and 90s in finance markets look like. And so a lot of my underlying principles obviously were still there, but they were overshadowed by this egotistical sort of narcissistic indulgence of trying to satisfy these desires that suddenly became awakened through what I was discovering. Lots of money, lots of drugs, lots of drinking, it was just fast cars and everything was exciting. And so what happened over 10 years was an indulgence down that path. And then, of course, the beautiful thing with nature and evolution is that it doesn't give up on you. It will make your life hell until you start to realize whether this is a personal or collective, humanitarian thing, until you realize that you're off your orbit. And so for me, the universe bestowed upon my existence anxiety, insomnia, depression, agoraphobia, panic attacks, like a miserable existence. All the while trying to get me to guide me into alignment back to what was my orbit. And I ignored and resisted for many, many years. And of course, the suffering just got worse. This is what suffering is. It's a guidance system. And then eventually at the age of 29, when it became so extreme, basically a full-blown nervous breakdown and suicidal tendencies, and really at that fork in the road. When we get to a fork in the road, what happens is you can't continue on that current trajectory. You have to deviate. And the deviation at crisis point is not continue on with more crisis. It's no, you don't get a choice anymore. You must deviate. And the deviation is breakdown or breakthrough. A marriage, breakdown or breakthrough. A company, breakdown, bankruptcy or breakthrough. A civilization, breakdown or breakthrough. And so this is what crisis is for. It's like, okay, fork in the road here. Which path are you going to take? And for me, I was contemplating the breakdown. I really contemplated whether I wanted to continue on with that journey. I didn't know if I wanted to go on. The light had seemingly been put out. And so it was divine intervention, I guess, whatever you want to call it. I came across meditation, and that's when I started to realize there was another alternative. And it was phenomenal what happened. There was night and day, how quickly my life turned around, and I started to find another pathway. It was really exciting, and I've been doing that ever since. So there's a lot more in that story.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I guess
cut it short a little bit, add a little bit more depth, because it's probably like, then what happened? So
yeah.
I did go back into broking. I had a sick leave, mental health leave from work.
Mm-hmm.
I was literally a basket case. I was seeing psychiatrists, put on pharmaceutical drugs. I had a nervous breakdown. That's when I found meditation. I went back into that career, just so everyone knows, to give the full spectrum. I continued on for 16 more years as a broker. So it wasn't the industry that was a problem. It wasn't the job that was a problem. It was my relationship with that world. That was the variable, and that's what I changed. The job was not a problem. It's a great job. We can make a ton of money and be very good at it. And I started taking clients, instead of doing lines of coke in the nightclubs and strip clubs, I started taking them to restaurants, taking their wives to the ballet, taking my clients to yoga and surfing retreats in Byron Bay. So I just brought a twist to what I was doing and aligned it to what was more aligned with me and my journey. And then eventually I left that to teach meditation and coach people full time.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it gives us a bit more context, I guess, as to where you are today. And there's a couple of interesting things that I just want to pick out, if you could just elaborate on. One of them is, you said you came from, a very wholesome background. You were living in a remote area, and then you went into this stark world, I guess, of trading, fast life. And how did that come about? And how do you feel that was it the decadence that was introduced to you that you'd never experienced before that kind of proliferated into this lifestyle that you started to live?
Yeah, I actually wasn't meant to be in finance. I came back from backpacking. I took a year off after high school. It was tradition in our family. We took a gap year.
Okay.
So I backpacked around the world. I was in America and UK, across Europe, working in cafes and restaurants. And I came back and I had a few months to fill in before my degree doing journalism. And I was literally going to do a degree in journalism and write articles against capitalistic greed and save the world from the horrors of the finance system. I was listening to Susie and the Banshees and the Smiths and reading French existentialism, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. And I was motivated to be this sort of existential, spiritual sort of leader in some way. It was weird. And then I suddenly thought, heck, I need some money before uni. So I applied to a bunch of jobs in the paper. No interest in staying in them. I just applied to any job I could find and sent off all these resumes. And then I landed this job on a trading room floor. I'm like, okay, that'll be great. And I was going to take it for 3 months, and I wasn't going to tell them after 3 months I was going to leave the job and do my degree. It was one of those sliding doors moments. And at 3 months, my probation came up as a trainee and they gave me a big pay rise. And I was like, it was crazy money. I was 19 years old. It was insane. They gave me a bonus. There was so much money. I'm like, uni, slugging it out, eating too many noodles and cheap cask wine, or this is really exciting. Next thing, they got me a corporate Amex card. They give me a fast car, and I was told to go out and win traders business. Yeah. So you just morphed into this sort of new personality that's just brought into that world and influenced by that environment.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. Les and I actually had a conversation in one of our previous episodes about environment and how that kind of guides our identity. And
can guide our identity.
Yeah, can.
Yeah.
And I guess, that's a very big distinction, can guide our identity, because for you, what I find really interesting is you were in that environment which brought you to a place that you didn't want to be in, that fork in the road, right? Where you had to choose breakdown and breakthrough. And you clearly have had a breakthrough, or did have one. And you continued in that same role and environment. And there's this notion out there that we're not stronger than our environment. That's something that I, do believe, but I'm very open to have my mind change on it, because there are clearly people who, are stronger than their environment in respects, and they're able to return to an environment like the way you did and flourish.
Yeah, I think we're stronger than the environment. The environment is just a framework. It's a structure, and you get to choose within that container who you want to be and how you want to be. who you want to be and how you want to be. And once we start to, the only challenge we have is that we come from an egoic identity that has no freaking idea who it is. This is the challenge with the ego. Someone says to the ego, you're amazing. The ego says, oh, I must be amazing. Then someone says to the ego, you're a douchebag. And like, oh, I must be a douchebag. But when we start to discover and penetrate beyond the layer of the ego and discover our own divine truth and our own essence, the very core of who we are, beyond the identity, seeming identity of an egoic structure, then we start to own that. And then we can embody that, and we can be free within whatever container or vessel that we're existing within, whether it's a relationship, it's a job. We transcend the seeming layer of identity and false, persona, and really establish our truth. And then what happens is, this is how we get evolution. This is how we get evolution. This is how we get progress, is that we can transcend all the coding and conditioning and the external influence, and we can be unfamiliar in what's already familiar. But as we share more and more of what's unfamiliar in that familiar environment, it becomes familiar. So what I'm saying here is that you might embody and represent something that's very unfamiliar for the collective mass. But if you start to really own that and hold that, you can do one of two things. You can go, oh, this is really awkward because I'm very different to everyone else. I'll just be more like everyone else. Then everyone else just stays like everyone else. And that's how we have a collective, recurring, recycled known, and these habitual patterns that just keep showing up in our society. But when you really stand tall and stand firm in your new established awareness, then you represent an opportunity for someone else to be inspired by that. This is where we're at in the world now. We're starting to see this proliferation of people not being trapped in the recurring known and going, I want to embody truth. I want to be stabilized in the new status quo. And it doesn't have to be in a corporate setting or relationship. It can be collectively in the world. And as we start to embody more and more of that, in the past, people that represented these new versions, they were assassinated. They were put on crosses. They were annihilated. It's like, you can't disrupt the current status quo. They can't hold back the tide anymore. They've been trying to plug that sinking boat for a long time, and the holes are just getting more and more and more. And it's like the whole system's collapsing because people are collectively going, yeah, like, I'm freaking hell, man. I'm not going to be influenced by the collective status quo and the ignorance that's there. I'm going to start to really stabilize what's true for me. So that's how the collective gets influenced by the individual.
Super powerful, man. And I totally, you can start to see the shift in the world if you are observant enough to it. Certain things, like you said, that were always ostracized and looked down upon or pushed aside and seen as, drugs and things like that. I think a really prime example is, the emergence of the actual study and legitimizing the plant medicine industry. That's something that sort of was looked down upon in the 50s and the 60s, but now we're seeing the actual potential benefits that it can have in a controlled environment, which is totally to your point, mate. What I want to bring something back, or your attention back to, Tom, is something you said, and I feel it is very important that you highlighted it. Your upbringing in a Catholic and very rural environment, close to nature, and I feel that it is very important in terms of how it influenced your decision at this crossroad that you were met with at that breakthrough or breakdown phase. So could you tell us more about how you feel that had an influence to where you are now?
I guess there's two ways to look at it. We look at it on a sort of a grounded human perspective, which was I was raised in a family that had a lot of love in it, was very stable, and we went to mass, which was a regular discussion. Let's call it a mass, a regular discussion ultimately about the essence of this higher being called God, and there was other things like a priest and Jesus and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately what we're talking about here is the underlying idea that there's this something else and we pray to that thing that's not tangible, right? And so that that's one thing. Or it could be that on a deeper, more spiritual level, it could be that my soul chose that particular journey because it could see that that was a very conducive pathway for my continuing soul evolution to come through that family, because it was going to introduce me to this idea. So either way, I'm in this environment, and on a regular basis, we're doing rosary, we're saying grace every night, we do Lent for 40 days, we learn the idea of surrender and tapas, we call it in Vedic philosophy, giving up something to connect deeper to God. And this is all just, some could say it's just dogma and conditioned religion. True, it is that. There's no question about it. But it's also a framework for someone on their journey of awakening that has relevance. It doesn't matter what their religion. All religions have at the very essence of them something so beautiful about the recognition that there's something. And if you're an atheist, that's cool as well. You can just be pure scientist. It doesn't matter. But if it's helping you become a better human being with greater levels of kindness and care, it doesn't mean you're perfect. I still screw up. Don't get me wrong. Still make mistakes. I'm still fallible. But it definitely helped me start with the idea and the awareness and a deep sense of knowingness on an experiential level that there was something else, and that there was a relationship occurring there between me and it. And I could give you many experiences of childhood where I was like this validation of this presence of something. And that obviously, when there's suffering, what I see it as is a widening of the gap between me and that. Mm. And when I was in my greatest point of suffering, I was most disconnected to it. And when I was in my greatest levels of bliss and joy, I was deeply connected to it. You can give it any name you want: God, the divine, awareness, presence, consciousness, Yahweh, whatever you want to call that thing that's the subtlest, non-manifest form of pure intelligence and love. And so what it enabled me to do is, by default, do this sort of pathway of having this wonderful childhood and connection to God. And I prayed a lot. I had a strong sense of God. And then just completely forgetting it, completely wiping it from my life. Why would I need God? I got ecstasy and cocaine, man, far out. Yeah, see how that works out. Yeah. See how you feel with that.
Yeah. No,
and
I've
then
been
life
there,
becomes
man.
shit, right?
Yeah, been there, done that. And it's really interesting to me, mate. I mean, I feel like I had a similar experience in my childhood, in that I was raised a Catholic, but I had a different connection to you. Perhaps there was a lack of awareness, or even for yourself, even as a kid, I don't think that we have this, acute discernment of what awareness is per se. And I saw it the other way, in that it was just a forced indoctrination, and I pushed against that. But obviously I rekindled with it through other means, through philosophy, Eastern philosophy that is more detached with, the intellectualization and rationalization of those famous philosophers of the Enlightenment period that you mentioned before. But that's the way I connected with it later, much later in life, and at a similar, crisis point as you, mate. I guess a different path I took was that I saw it as a sign to exit that part of my life, that corporate environment, because just like you, I myself teach and guide meditation and mentor people, but I also offered it in a very corporate environment in one of the big four banks in Australia. And I'm sure you were met with similar, I guess, responses in terms of scoffing and, those strange looks to say, oh, what are you trying to do? Or it's just not for me. This is weird, all that sort of stuff. So I'd be interested to sort of hear your experience with that once you returned back into that environment and stayed there for 16 years.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense of point of difference. Relationships thrive on unity and connection. The more connection, the more unity, the better the relationship. And that can be fans of a football team, subscribers to a political party. It could be, you know, a men's group, religious group. Commonality brings people together. When we create a point of difference in that relationship, then we are the one causing the relationship to fracture. And that's what I was doing. I was creating a point of difference. So, you know, for me, for the early stages of that time, it was about not highlighting that point of difference. And just, it was my own personal journey, and I didn't really let people in on it. The hardest part was that I didn't want to continue drinking and doing drugs. So what I was doing there was fracturing those relationships. And a lot of those relationships dropped away because I was no longer in that point of commonality, you know, 2 a.m, racking up lines. So when we start to bring in a whole different experience, we create fracture in the relationship. So admittedly, a lot of those relationships started to fade and deteriorate. And that's when I had to start, and I had a big conundrum. I actually confided in at the time, my meditation teacher about how was I going to integrate my new level of awareness and existence in life. You know, I could have just walked out of the industry, but the reality was I was paid a lot of money, and the job was a really, really good job. There was nothing wrong with the job. It was a good job, and it paid a lot of money, and I had a family to feed. And I lived in Sydney's eastern suburbs. So anyone that's listening that doesn't know Sydney's eastern suburbs, is not an easy place to live if you don't have much money. So I didn't want to change that area of my life, and the job was good. So I needed to find a way to integrate my new way of living in that career. And so it was about being subtle, but also being over time earning the respect of my peers for who I was becoming. Again, like I wasn't perfect. I was still a bit of a doofus at times, and I still screwed up. So I want to make sure that people don't think of me as some enlightened monk on a trading room floor. You know, that wasn't the case. But I just started to tweak and adjust the way I live my life. You know, I much rather go to bed at 10 o'clock and wake up and go and do yoga down the beach, or go for a surf and meditate and then go to work, you know, rather than get home at 3 or 4 in the morning, feeling like crap, and turning up all day the next day feeling like shit. So it was just adjusting it and tweaking it. And then slowly, you know, particularly with marketing, a big part of the job was marketing. By day, it wasn't a problem. I just had to be on ball and on point and sharp and efficient. And I could do that. That was not a problem. It was the nighttime and the social interactions. How did I engage in those? And that was about, you know, it was really quite phenomenal. I'll tell you a story around this. So, you know, traditionally I would take the clients out, which was generally a male trader, who by this point in time, as we progressed in our career, the traders and the brokers, in the early days, they're young and they didn't mind just going out and doing all sorts of crazy stuff till 3, 4 in the morning. But as they progressed, and we were still doing that, and they got married and they had kids, and then they were getting home at 2, 3 in the morning, and the wives would be like, "You're out with that Tom Cronin, just stay away from him, he's trouble." You know, the wives were nagging him because I was a bad guy, right? But then when I started meditating, and I would take them and their wife to the opera house, to the ballet, or a concert, or a nice dinner with my wife and their wife, and we'd have them at home tucked up in bed by 10:30, and then their wife like, "Oh, Tom and Jen, they're so nice. You should do more business with him. You know that, right?" It's like, this is gold. I found out the new way of marketing, you know? So it was just about making some not major rupturous sort of changes, but just tweaking it.
I think that's super interesting. I think people find a lot of times that they need to have some massive grand gesture or explosion moment, when it's actually just these little things that stack on each other that cause a real change.
Look, I mean, this is an analogy, and it sounds really wanky. So I get it if someone's going to send a message to me on Facebook and say that sounded really wanky. I get that. That's cool. But it's like Clark Kent, right? Now, the guy's wearing glasses and a tweed jacket. He's got X-ray vision. What's he doing with glasses on? I bet it was just fake glasses. But what he was doing, he was practicing integration. He could have been going to work as a journalist in his lycra and his cape, just so he's fully prepared and he didn't have to waste his time getting into a phone booth to try and save the cat. Now, I'm not saying I'm Superman, but what he was doing here as an analogy is that he learned the art of what it was to act like a human so he could have human relationships. And he's goofy, putting his glasses up all the time. And, you know, he's a bit of a dork, right? The guy's freaking Superman. But to be integrated into the human world and have successful relationships, Lois Lane and Clark kind of starting to date, he would alienate himself if he was always acting out as Superman all the time. He only had to be Superman when he needed to be Superman. The rest of the time, let's just be Clark Kent.
Yeah.
Let's go to the footy, have a fun chat with the mates, integrate, and be contactable.
Yeah. And I think that's, so important to highlight, because oftentimes if you try to be Superman all the time, you're lending yourself to be ostracized.
You'll be ostracized, you'll be uncontactable, you won't have any friends. Life will be pretty boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's a really cool way to put it in that analogy, because I myself have gone through similar struggles in my mind in terms of when I came to the realization of who I truly was. Back in 2013, when my crisis point, when I got diagnosed with cancer, it was a point where I actually contemplated, do I have to go and live in a cave by myself, to rid myself of this environment that I'm so that rubs me the wrong way, really. But it's so interesting. It's like you come to a point where you realize there's a level of balance that is required, a harmony between these worlds that we live in, like the reality of what is outside and in front of you versus the inner world that you're building for yourself, and a strengthening within.
Look, I mean, it's to add to that, and yes, that's true. And also, if it's compelling and it's calling you from a heart-centered space to go into renunciation and solitude and silence, then follow that. We recognize in the Vedic tradition a twofold path for one on the journey to awakening. The first phase is what we call yogi phase. Second phase is called rishi phase. Now, yogi phase is reclusiveness, renunciation, and to try and stabilize the inner space. Now, for me, it was just regular meditation. That was my recluse. Okay. I still have yearnings of going off into a monastery in Spain or Thailand or Vietnam or India and just having complete reclusion from the world. But what has a greater priority and preference for me is family. And so that takes higher priority. So it's about managing my preferences here and integrating the reclusive aspect of my day into my interactive aspect of day. But however, if someone is truly called for total silence and total exclusiveness, to go off into that reclusive environment, wherever it might be in the world, then follow that path. But what will happen potentially, and it looks like, this is already happening for you, Leslie, is there comes a tipping point where we start to, as a seeker, find. That's why we withdraw to as a seeker, we're looking to find. And then we start to find, wow, there it is. There's gold inside. There's this bliss. There's this love. There's this divinity. There's this wisdom starts to flow through. And then we go from seeker to finder, we're finding. And now we go to sharer, and that's the rishi phase. The rishi phase, or seer, one that can see, starts to come out of their reclusiveness with the experience that there is external suffering. And in some way, shape, or form, I have the capacity to support and alleviate that suffering and help people find a path where there's less suffering. And I have some, not responsibility, but some compulsion to want to move in that direction to assist others with their journey. And that's the two-pronged process. We start out as seekers. It's very hard to start out as a rishi. And some people that try going out in the world, I'm just going to go and try and save the world, they're on unstable ground. But if we can stabilize a little bit of time in the reclusive phase, then you'll naturally, by default, start moving into the next phase.
Yeah, totally. And completely echo your sentiments there in terms of how this sort of balance came to be. Like you said, it was a very, the power of meditation truly had a very strong yearning for me in terms of wanting to, go deeper and deeper and just seclude myself. And, I did that in Japan when I went to a Zen Buddhist monastery. But then when I came back out, you feel that presence, you feel that timelessness of presence. but it gives you that clarity. That's what it gives you, right? Everything else falls away. That doesn't mean anything truly to your life. But then everything else, it's like you need to combine it with something, right? There was still a pull back to modernity, to this environment, and like the way I see it, like, you know, that's why the yin yang symbol is such a beautiful harmonic balance, right? Because there's this monk side that I want to cultivate, and I've been cultivating for so many years. But then I also want to be the warrior, the samurai, you know, to have action, to respond to the world as it, you know, as it presents itself to me, and respond in the right way, you know, with my truth, with my integrity.
Yeah, I always come back to this story of Gurudev Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, who's a great master. And he, at the age of 8, left home to find enlightenment. He sought out teachers in the jungles of the Himalayas. And eventually, by the age of 21, he became enlightened. And he spent the next 40 years in complete solitude and silence, in a divine ecstasy, divine bliss, just in a very beautiful, peaceful state of remoteness. And many people had become aware of this man. He lived with 2 Bengal tigers in the forests of northern India. And many people had requested he come and share his wisdom and knowledge. But he continued in silence, putting up his hand and staying in his reclusive state. And then eventually, around the age of 60, I think it was 58, he came down and broke his silence and solitude and started to teach, and was highly, highly revered, and bestowed one of the great honors of the Rishi world, the Shankaracharya of Jyotirmath, which is a seat of being one of the great recognized sages of, there was 4 Shankaracharya positions in India, north, south, east, and west. He was given the northern title, which is it was an empty seat for 150 years. They didn't feel anyone was capable and worthy of sitting in that seat, and he was eventually given that position. And in a very short time before he left his body, he did phenomenal things to bring, and I wouldn't be here talking to you right now because that technique would be not have shared itself into the Western world. He played a significant role in that. And so that's the power of him being patient and knowing when, tuning into when was the right time that was relevant for him to come out. There was no right or wrong. It's like, you know, would have been 5 years before or 10 years before. It didn't matter. You know, when he came out and whatever he did was relevant. And so if you're feeling, whoever's listening, I need reclusiveness, I need to just have my head in spiritual text or in silence and solitude, do that. And one day you may or may not, there's no right or wrong there, feel an impulse to start a podcast or write a book or make a film or run a retreat, or, you know, you just do a talk at a prison. Whatever that impulse is, if it comes, it comes, follow it. If it doesn't, then that's fine as well.
And one thing I would like to talk about is when impulses come to you. I think there's this inner language that we have, which we can't put words to, which a lot of us call intuition. And when you have those impulses, it's funny, some people lean into them and some people don't. And why do you think that is?
Because we have a noisy mind. So there's 2 languages that is being spoken to us. And one's very loud, and it's the intellect that's thinking, 70,000 thoughts a day. And it's a coded repetition of noise. And then we have this heart-centered intuition that's down here. We're not trained. We don't teach this at school. Okay, guys, next class is going to be on intuition and listening to your heart center. No, let's just fill this thing up with lots and lots of thoughts and data. And so by the time we get outside school and then we go to university, it's like this thing is completely turned down. We can't hear it. It's not until we start quieting the mind through our meditation. It's like, whoa. It's like having Metallica playing on 11 on your stereo speaker and then having a Brahms symphony or a Beethoven symphony playing on 1 and not being able to hear it. So if we just take out the Metallica, not that there's anything wrong with those guys, they're cool guys and cool music. What if we turn down that volume? And we don't need to turn up the volume of the Brahms. You just have to be able to listen to it.
Yeah. It's that old analogy of the muddy water that's stirred. Once you stop stirring, the dust settles to the bottom and you find clarity in the cup, right?
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
Can I use that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Of
I love
course you can.
analogies. I'm always looking for new metaphors.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love a good analogy, mate. So I might use a Superman one as well.
Yeah, yeah. We're sharing and caring here.
Yeah, but I think, and that's a super important thread to follow in terms of, you know, this Western world, and I guess our addiction to rationalization and intellection, and like it's almost inverse in my mind, right? And that's why I keep coming back to your origin, you know, your rootedness to nature, your groundedness in spirituality, in that connection, right? Like, again, I go back to Zen Buddhism because that's what I study. They have like a triad of thinking, or three. It's like a trinity, right? There's the rational intellectual mind that we're all so familiar with, and then there's intuitive thinking, in it's in between, right? That's like a translation of nature from the heart. And then there is enlightenment, or no knowledge, they call it, where we are one with nature, right? We're a part of it. So it's almost, we're doing things in reverse in the Western world, right? We're sort of just intellectualizing about things that are generic, that have been learned and cultivated throughout time, and they have a structure to it and a sheen and like a boxiness. They got straight edges. But then on the inverse end, if we had that original connection with nature and cultivated that upways, that is like the true, you know, creative expression of every single individual on earth, you know.
It's a distortion of value.
Mm.
And we place a lot of value on, well, immense value on the accumulation of external world and the dynamic between the outer world and us, that subject-object relative phenomenon. And we don't put much value on our internal currency, which is our connection with self or God, the divine, whatever. And so we can have both. This is the new way forward, is to have both. We don't have to run off to caves. It's not how we want to live. But what we'll see is we see that a lot of challenge to the current status quo. And it's interesting where a lot of that challenge is coming from. It's coming from a lot of the more awakened environments, a lot of awakened communities. We're going to see a reassessment of value. A reassessment of value. And look, if we don't do it ourselves, the universe is going to organize it for us. And it's just giving us a little taster. I'm going to lock you all up in your rooms for a couple of months. It's like little Johnny mucking up, sent to your room, 10 minutes in the room, 10 minutes on the bin, 10 minutes on the bench, you know, sin binned on the football game. Johnny sent to his room. All of it's the same analogy. You've been mucking up. You're not getting it. You've lost a sense of value. You think just printing money and borrowing as much of this currency that you can possibly borrow to buy things that you don't necessarily overwhelmingly need, to try to seek some level of fulfillment from that experience, is going to keep working for you. Let's just take it away from you and see how you go for a while. If you get some lessons from that and integrate this new level of awareness into your new way forward when we let you out of your rooms, that just as when you come off the bench, have you learned the lesson? You come back on the field and you start making mistakes. Guess what's going to happen? You might not go on the bench for 10 minutes. You might be sent off the game for the next 2 seasons or next game, right? So this is our opportunity here in our time of introspection, of being sent to our rooms, figuratively and literally, to really do some deep inquiry. Inquiry is in, not enquiry. We're doing inquiry all our time. What's on Netflix tonight? That's inquiry. Where can I make more money? That's inquiry. Where can I find love? That's inquiry. Inquiry is looking within and starting to explore, how have I contributed to this experience? And how can I somehow integrate what I'm learning through this experience into a new way forward for me and for my environment and potentially for the collective?
And I want to ask you, mate, following that thread along, the difficulty with that in the modern world is, I guess it's surrounding, this intangibility of results, right? And also the time it takes, or the perceived time it takes, in comparison to everything that is instantly gratifying, or what we're used to being instantly gratifying. What else would you talk to in terms of like the difficulty of inquiry in today's people? Like, and also aside from this, delayering and unlearning,
Yeah, it's tough. Being human is really difficult, whether you're awake or not. It's just a difficult process. It's brutal, man, far out. The challenge we face is that there's a natural tendency as an animal to take the path, and the shortest path possible, to the easiest sense of pleasure. So if you put a cow in a paddock with green grass, and you put a salt stick or a sugar block in the middle of that paddock on a table, guess where the cows are going to gather? They can eat the healthy grass, which is naturally conditioned for them to eat. And it's not really that exciting, but it's just, they know it's good for them. Or they can go and if you just keep putting more and more sugar blocks there on that table in the middle of that paddock, they're going to be so sucked in by their natural conditioning to seek the shortest path to pleasure, regardless of consequence.
Yeah.
Well, we have to put these massive signs on the cigarette packets. This is going to take your leg off if you keep doing it. I know, but I just can't help myself.
Yeah. It reminds me of one of these Harvard studies. I think it was done in the early noughties. I can't remember exactly when it was done, but they tested, I guess, how people would fare within a silent, enclosed environment, and they told them, you'd be held in this room with no stimulus for 15 minutes. And if you wanted out early, you would have to be put through this shock process, which actually hurt quite a bit. And a high percentage of people would simply take the pain, rather than endure 15 minutes of silence. So it's fascinating to me, about just how difficult it is perceived to be, in today's world.
Yeah. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just some play that the universe created to make it a fascinating journey. Yeah, it is interesting, the design of this.
Yeah.
Why can't we just be enlightened? Why don't we have to be through this process? Here's the interesting thing. I asked a friend of mine who's fanatical about yoga. They love yoga, and they do yoga for a reason, because they want to use that as a tool to make their life better and eventually free them from suffering. And they were having a really down day, and they were a bit bummed out. And I said, just say you could have enlightenment today, and there would be no suffering, and you'd be fully self-realized in the divine state, no egoic structure continuing to occupy your inner world, and you are just the pure embodiment and expression of divine bliss and love as an enlightened, embodied being. Which would imply then you don't have to worry about all this yoga stuff. Far out, every day going to yoga classes, sitting on the mat, and then having to do your meditation. You don't need all those things. You don't need to go to all these conferences and these retreats. That process is all done. You're free now. I said, just imagine that. You wouldn't have to do any more yoga. You don't have to do any meditating, because you've actually awakened and realized and arrived at the destination. Which would you rather? Well, I like my yoga. I want to do yoga. It's like, of course you do. That's why you're in the journey. That's why you have suffering. Because if you didn't want to be in the process, you would just wake up.
Yeah, totally. A friend of mine, he's a mythologist and storyteller. How he presented that to me, very similar. That, like you said, life is it's suffering, right? Regardless of how you look at it, it's suffering one way or another. It's just whether we decide or we choose whether we're suffering in the right way or not. That's the question we ask ourselves. Are we suffering in the right way? Towards the right destination, so to speak. Yeah.
Sometimes I think I really get it. And then other days I'm like, I have no freaking idea. I'm just like, I have no idea. Why am I here? Like, I don't understand this. It's like, so it's, I can't tell you what the answers are. I just keep trying to do my best.
Yeah. And I think that's the important part, right? It's like this acknowledgement that there is no potential outcome, but all we really need to do day by day is take one step ahead. It's that walking that pathless path. That's the analogy to use. It's a path that we know that we need to walk. It's pathless because we don't know what's ahead, but we just need to commit to walking it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, let's not paint it as too bleak a scenario as it has been painted at times. There is roses along the way.
Absolutely.
There's butterflies, and there's children's cuddles, and there's making love, and there's puppy dogs, and there's waterfalls, and there's rainbows and dolphins, and it's, you know, it's a joyous experience as well.
Totally. The way I like to explain it is it's the beautiful struggle, you know. It's a struggle, but it's beautiful at the same time. But it comes down to perception, right?
Yeah. And just to take those moments when they come, and to sit and to witness the beauty. We call it Leela in Vedic philosophy. Leela is the dance of the divine, that everything in its subtlest form is an expression of the divine playing itself out in some form or substance. And to start to look at the subtlety of that reality and feel it's love making. You know, the breeze on your cheek is love making. Love making isn't just two bodies rubbing together. It's the smell of a flower. That's the essence of that flower and your nostril making love. It's the exquisite delightfulness of the sweet creaminess of coconut ice cream on your taste buds, on your tongue, or the intimacy of someone running their fingers through your hair. You know, this is all love making. And to not miss these moments each and every day that are brushing up against us.
Definitely. And I think there's also, you know, mentioned beauty in the struggle. I'd heard somewhere that, you know, the obstacles that are put in front of us are actually a love gift from the universe that show us what we need to be addressing. And once we address those situations or those obstacles and we come away with lessons or some form of enlightenment, it's beautiful right after. And I want to just remind people of that, because I think it's really easy to get caught up on that bleak outset that you might think is everything suffering. And there is a lot of it, but on the other side, there is a lot of beauty.
I keep coming back to it's just fundamental principles of evolution, that things evolve to be more aware, to be more awake, to be more love, to be more light. And I know whenever I'm in my struggles now, because I've been doing this process and seeing this sequence unravel time and time again for 25 years now, that beyond this, it's even better. Beyond this, it's even better. I'm more awake. I'm more enlightened. I'm more immersed in lovingness. And so now I can go, oh, this is bleak, but I know beyond this, as long as I'm doing my practice, as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm growing, as long as I'm listening, then I know that beyond this, it's even better.
It's just a playing out of the cyclic nature of seasons, you know. This is our life, right? There's a rise, there's a blooming, there's a blossoming in spring, but then there's also a shedding and a falling in autumn. But it's cyclic, and just like our lives, right? It's never going to be all, you know, all beautiful, all love and roses all the time. So a really wonderful thread to sort of cap off the conversation, mate. So, Tom, thanks so much for being here. Really, really honored to have you on our show. If there's anything you want to plug or, you know, tell people where to find you, floor's yours, mate.
Thank you. Look, I mean, I do love working with people. I support people with their journey. If main thing that I do is help people transition from being in that state of not knowing where that life purpose is, what their dharma is, how to move forward in their life, then they can reach out to me on my website, tomcronin.com. Also have retreats. We've got one in Byron Bay this year, 6-day retreat in November. And we've got 3 coming up next year in Byron Bay, Bali and Greece. So really excited about those. So if you want a deeper immersion into waking up, realizing your full potential and manifesting your life purpose, then by all means, just come and reach out to me or find me on Instagram.
Awesome. and we'll put all those details in the show notes, guys. Shauna, where can our audience find you, mate?
Yeah, easiest place to find me is just on Instagram, Shaun_Coop. So it's SHAUN_COOP. You can hit me up with a message there and we can chat there.
Yeah. And you can find me on my website, findingspace.co. Shoot me an email there, or any of my social pages as well, Facebook or Instagram. It is at findingspace.co. Shaun and I also have an email for the podcast. So if there's any questions or queries about this particular episode, or you want us to talk about anything in particular, bring on any guests, it's the Hustle and Flow podcast at gmail.com.
Cool. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the work you're doing, Tom, and I really enjoyed our time here today. So thank you for that.
Likewise. Great questions. Thanks for having me on, guys. Really fun to be chatting and riffing with this stuff. It's not often we get to talk about this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of, that's really why Les and I started this podcast, is to have these conversations. And, we take a lot away from conversations like this ourselves. And we thought what a lovely gift it would be for people to hear them and just extract little nuggets and things that provoke their own thoughts and might send them down their own path to finding some stuff out they didn't think about before.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, guys. Great work.
Awesome. So if you're listening and you did take any of those nuggets away, I took a lot away today from you, Tom. We just ask that you share with one other person. That's how we grow the podcast. We'd love to get these conversations out so more people hear them. And until next time, guys, thanks for listening.
See you guys.